And we will get this going. So everyone, welcome to the ASQ Innovation Division 2025 first presentation of the year. We are so grateful to our phenomenal spotlight speaker for today, Miss Kim Farrington. She is not only the founder of KTech LLC, but an esteemed federal government executive, chief financial officer, chief administration officer, as well as a thought leader and innovator across many different areas. She has really helped shape the First Responder Network Authority, as well as build innovation tools in with her development, design, implementation, and really federal government promulgation of FirstNet's budget, financial, and costing tool. So she has really been able to take that innovation tool and promulgate it all across federal government. Her career has included the White House Office of OMB, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. Office of Personnel Management, and Department of Defense. And she really has a very diverse and broad background, including networking, again, the financial area, cybersecurity, and is a board member on multiple boards. Just lately, she has received her certificate for executive leadership in artificial intelligence from the Partnership for Public Service and achieved her Harvard Kennedy School executive certificate in public leadership. And with all that on her plate and what she's doing all across the country and the government, she has now declared her candidacy for the 2026 Senate campaign. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Miss Kim Farrington to the floor to kick off our 2025 ASQ Innovation Division season.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Farrell. You're just amazing. And really appreciate being here this evening. This is I love supporting Dr. Farrell. She's just been amazing in my career and as a mentor, and just so excited to be here tonight. So what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is something that I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are experiencing in the workplace, and that is the multi-generational workforce. It is something that is causing a lot of what I've found is a lot of group dynamics, we'll call it group dynamics, in how each generation seems to operate in a different manner. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about tonight is how do you take these different focuses, different priorities, different stereotypes really, and create the most dynamic and effective team that you can to achieve whatever results you or your company or your agency, if in the government, is setting out to do. So let me start by sharing with you the definitions of what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. And those are the different definitions of the different generational cultures in our workforce today. The first are the traditionalists. The traditionalists are loosely defined. It's interesting how there are different definitions for the different age groups that comprise each of the different generations. But for tonight's discussion, I'm going to talk about the traditionalists as those being born before 1945. And we also have the baby boomers who were born between 1946 and 1965. Then you have what's called the Generation X, which is those who are born between 1966 and 1977. Then there's the millennials, otherwise known as the Gen Y of generation. And those are the folks that are in the workforce that were born between 1978 and 1995. And lastly, you have right now your Gen Z, also called Gen 2020, that were born after 1995. And what I'm going to share with you tonight is the common characteristics for each of these generations. Note that these are generalities, stereotypes, and I'll give examples of where I don't personally fit certain stereotypes for my generation. But again, this is just a discussion so you can understand the generalities of the people you're working with. But as I'll note in the end, it's important to take each individual on a case-by-case basis, how they fit into these stereotypes, but in a new situation, new workplace, for example. These will help you get started into sort of understanding how the different generations think when it comes to groupthink and group efforts. So I will start by defining our traditionalists. And again, those were the folks that were born pre-1945. And again, these are stereotypes. The traditionalists were born, that were born in the US are 50 million. And their common characteristics are loyalty. They are very cautious. They are very formal, but yet they are proud. Most traditionalists are now retired, but their influence can still be seen in the workplace structures that have a top-down hierarchy with clear reporting structures and the quote-unquote uniform of a suit and tie. In fact, the cautious, rule-following traditionalists are the reason for many organizational practices that persist even to this day. They were also known for their company loyalty and the practice of working at one place your entire career. Much of this is due to the fact that 50% of the men of the traditionalist era shared the experience of serving in the military, compared to just 1% of our population today. And interestingly, most women of this era did not work outside the home. So can any of you relate to these traditionalist generalizations? I myself can. I remember when I walked into my job where I had more traditionalists supporting me as part of the team than any other generation. And I still to this day can see where those traditionalists always wear their suit and tie. We're starting to get away from the tie for a little bit, but most part always wearing that suit, that uniform. And again, that's just a generality, but for me, it seems to resonate very clearly in what I've seen in the workforce. So moving on to our baby boomers. Our baby boomers were born between 1946 and 1965, and there are about 76 million baby boomers in the US. Their common characteristics are optimism. They are very self-focused, very competitive, and what I call forever young. Boomers, until very recently, were the largest generation in American history. They created more competition in the workplace as women and minorities began to take jobs that were previously held specifically by white men in the traditionalist era. Although some boomers in their 50s and 60s are retired, others are still heavily involved in the US workforce thanks to their forever young natures and the global recession that began in 2008 and forced many boomers to postpone their retirement plans. Many boomers prioritized work over family obligations, and they did not have the technology available to work from anywhere but the office. So they sometimes can be less supportive of flexible workplace policies. And here's an example of where although I'm not a baby boomer, I sort of sway away from my general stereotypes, and that being that I worked for so many baby boomers who were not so supportive of flexible work policies, that sort of resonated with me and um, guided me as I grew up through my career to be a supervisor. I was not so flexible in my workplace policies, such as telework. I always felt guilty teleworking, but boy, has that changed in the last few years. So moving on to Gen X, Generation X. These were people in our nation that were actually across the world who were born approximately from 1966 to 1977. And there are 55 million Gen Xers born in the US. Their common characteristics are independence, they are very skeptical, and they are also tech pioneers. A generation almost as small as the traditionalists, Gen Xers have felt overshadowed by their boomer predecessors for most of their lives. They grew up independent, self-reliant, and supportive of technology that helped take care of themselves. And think about this. You've got the microwave ovens that they grew up with, video games, and personal computers. When they entered the baby boomer dominated workplace, they felt alienated and very unimportant, thinking that they would never be a big enough group to have a huge impact at work. That helped fuel the independent instincts that led many to move to Silicon Valley and do their own technology. And they wanted to do their own thing. Gen Xers are actually the most entrepreneurial generation. And I personally do fit that stereotype. I admit I am a Gen Xer, and I decided that I wanted to be as a hobby, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I actually have 3 patents and 4 trademarks. So I do fit that stereotype. But sandwiched between the massive boomers and the millennial generations, you could say that the Gen Xers have a hint of an inferiority complex, which is why they often see themselves as independent, self-sufficient, and out of the mainstream.
So we have a couple comments in the chat for you, and one is
Great.
just foot stomping. Orlando says, "My tribe, commitment and engagement as a must, Gen X." The other one is, could it be that Gen Xers are independent and self-reliant because they were latchkey kids since both their parents worked?
You know, that is a great point, Tammy. I myself, Gen Xer, I agree with that. I can relate to that because both of my parents worked, And in fact, this is just a little, side note. Both of my parents were working on Halloween, and I remember this so vividly because, of course, that was the day that I forgot to take the keys with me. So we were locked out of our house on Halloween. So my sister and I, because my parents were working and I didn't have the keys to the house, we ended up eating a lot of candy for dinner that night. So I can totally relate to that comment. So thank you for sharing. And I'm curious, what's Generation Jones? I've not heard of that before, but I like it. Is that Keeping Up with the Joneses by chance?
Very good play on words. Yes. Okay. So there, oh, it's the subset. It's the end subset of boomers. Very good. And I think
Very nice.
Orlando has something for you too, Kim. He says, once you get through all of the gens, he was saying maybe you could talk about this effective communication across them because they're having challenges that they're facing in that area.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that segue. Well, then we'll move on to the millennials before we talk about effective workplace environments. The millennials were born between 1978 and 1995. Millennials, aka Gen Y, their common characteristics are self-expression. They are very group oriented, super global, and tech dependent. When it comes to workplace influences, other generations often criticize millennials for acting entitled, demanding constant feedback, and thinking that they deserve the trophy just for showing up. These criticisms that are known as millennial shaming can actually be traced back to the way many Gen Ys were parented or peer-ented and taught. They grew up in an era which children received a lot of attention and coaching. Also known as the digital natives, many of today's young professionals grew up with the internet, and that has a major impact on how they see the world and how they interact with others. Thinking texting and IM, instant messaging, versus face-to-face or phone communication, as well as the expectation that infinite information is just one click away. And now it's actually not even one click away. It's just hold down a button, ask a question, and your phone gives you an answer. So very interesting how these different generations have grown up and how it's impacted them. Which actually leads to the Gen Z generation. And these are the folks that were born after 1995. There are about 66 million Gen Zers that are born in the US. Their common characteristics include a very cautious demeanor. They are very technologically advanced, also entrepreneurial, and they're very diverse group. The workplace influences are very different for Gen Z, but yet at the same time, not so much from other generations. Make way for the generation of entrepreneurs. 61% of Gen Zers, high school students, say that they want to be an entrepreneur rather than an employee. That means that successful companies will need to begin focusing on offering frequent rotational assignments and early leadership experiences to embrace this generation's entrepreneurial bent. As the most diverse generation in US history, Gen Z will also expect the current trend towards more inclusive communities and policies to continue and accelerate. As children who came of age following the Great Depression, or I'm sorry, the Great Recession, they will also likely uh, be able to share some of that cautiousness that they're experiencing, and very frugal characteristics of their traditionalist forebears. In fact, as an entrepreneur, I started my own business, and I was into retail sales with my invention. And it was very interesting to me that when I called to set up my charge cards, credit card versus debit card transaction processing company, I was expecting that there would be a lot more credit card charges than there would be debit cards. But I was actually incorrect and learned that it's the Gen Z generation that is very frugal, and they actually prefer to use debit cards over credit cards. So it's actually more expensive to do the transactions based on just the types of transactions that you're talking about, debit versus credit cards. And Gen Z is really pushing that debit card usage and frugality, um, even to today. So I find that very interesting. So that's the basically stereotypes, generalizations of the different generations that are in today's workforce. So the great question, and it was a great segue to this next conversation, and that is, how do you work most effectively in this multi-generational environment? First, you need to work on building relationships. And this is very important because this will allow you to learn to effectively work with each other in the same work environment. And it also helps break down those stereotypes. But again, the stereotypes are generalizations. Each individual is different. But it is very important to be able to understand how each person ticks to make them most effective. One example is where my mother, she's older, and my sister is a Gen Zer. Well, my mother could never get in touch with my sister, a Gen Zer, on the phone. My mom even threatened to call my sister super early in the morning, just so she could talk to my sister. And my sister didn't actually believe that this was the case. But guess what? Mom did call early. So then mom actually realized the difference in the generations. So my mom, before I did, my mom learned how to text so that she could actually communicate with my sister, because that was the preferred method for the Gen Zer, my sister. So now there's no issues with lack of communication because my mom has been trained on how to text and is fully able to communicate with my sister. So that's just one example of how to not only create those good working relationships, but build on those relationships and understand how each person likes to communicate and best communicates to make sure that you can move forward with communication, because communication is just so critical to any mission or achieving any results. So moving on to the next suggestion, and that is appreciate and embrace the differences. It was so funny. I actually was on a panel, led a panel on the multi-generational workforce, and I had a Gen Zer who was on the panel, And when I asked her, what are your thoughts on these stereotypes and generalizations? And she commented, I am a, I am, I'm just so proud of my generation and I will own it all. So the younger generations are very proud of how they are stereotyped and how they operate. And they really think they bring a lot to the table, which they do. And that's why it's important to appreciate and embrace those those differences that exist between the different generations. And as I mentioned, these are generalizations to help you move forward before you really get to know each individual. So you can't make assumptions about the other generations, but this is why this is important to be able to understand how they generally work and operate so that you can appreciate how they operate and their different diverse views on different and frames of reference that they bring to any situation. And it is important to work to get to know each person individually, know their work style, regardless of which generation they were born. And as I mentioned earlier, there were some instances where I don't fit in my generational characteristics. I actually operate outside some of those generational stereotypes. And that's why it's important to get to know each person and how they operate so you can effectively work together. And the other suggestion I have is to create a mentoring and learning opportunity anytime you have that opportunity to do so. Being here tonight or whatever time it is where you are, it is very important to just learn about the multi-generational workforce and what keeps them going, how they grew up and their frames of references. And I remember, just as an example, my grandmother who grew up in the time of the Great Depression. She, and this was before I really started studying the multi-generational workforce environment. And I always wondered why she wasn't, why she always wanted to go to this thrift store instead of going to the mall. And then after talking to her and understanding her background and how she grew up, I was able to understand how she grew up not having a lot of money growing up through the Depression, and that was a significant emotional event for her. So as a result, she liked and preferred to shop at the thrift stores versus, malls where I like to shop. But it gave me an opportunity to really understand why she thought the way she did and acted the way she did. And that just made for just a much better relationship. I wasn't so concerned then when I'd always ask her to go shopping with me and she'd prefer to go to the thrift store. So then we made it fun and I enjoyed going to the thrift stores with her because she was like a kid in a candy store and it made her happy. And then of course it made me happy. And the other idea behind the mentoring and learning opportunities across the different generations is it gives your team an opportunity to achieve inclusion between the different generations, bringing those diverse views, those very different frames of reference to a situation that we all are experiencing. I mean, that gives you an opportunity to see every facet of what people are thinking and how they're thinking. And now you'll understand why they are thinking the way they do to better achieve the goal for the whole organization. And I think it's important to do not only, I think it's important to do cross mentoring because with different generations, you can learn from each other. Having a Gen Zer being mentored by a baby boomer that really helps facilitate that understanding of those different frames of references. And I think it really brings out group dynamics. Although sometimes very interesting conversations can occur, I think that group dynamics and that just different approach to the same situation really helps each generation in that mentoring relationship understand better why others are thinking the way they do, which only helps facilitate the workforce environment and understanding each other and moving forward. But there's one thing that I want to end on before we get to questions, and that is, don't get frustrated by the things that other generations do. Appreciate those differences and work to understand them. I always, in going into a situation where we have different generations, I always like to figure out, why is that other person in this conversation that sees a totally different approach to this, why are they thinking so differently? And that's where that understanding comes into play, is learning to understand why they think the way they do, to better understand what the best solution is for the situation going forward and solving the problem that is at hand. So with that, I will open it up for any questions and comments, but I did want to leave this graphic up because I find it very interesting and an excellent summary of the different generations and what is important to them and what makes them tick. Like the traditionalists, you look at them; they were, as I mentioned with my grandmother, they experienced the Great Depression, World War I and World War II. Work was an obligation to them. It wasn't the same as it was for the younger generations that you see today. And home ownership, if you're a traditionalist, typically they were very proud of their home ownership. And funny example about that one, my goal was home ownership, even though I'm not a traditionalist. My goal was to own a home. In fact, I owned a home before I could actually even drink legally, and but that was my goal. But then my sister, who's a millennial, it was just the opposite and didn't own her first home until, uh, gosh, 4 years ago. So her focus, her goal was not home ownership. Hers was more that freedom and flexibility that millennials typically are looking for. And the career paths for traditionalists are very slow and steady, and you stay in one job for your whole career. Whereas if you look to the boomers, just as in summarizing, they were experiencing the television, loved their TV, and they actually experienced the moon landing and also Watergate and the Vietnam War. Their work was just expected of them, and their inspiration was job security. They were loyal to their employer and really connected to values. And they were really focused on upward mobility in their career paths. The Gen Xers were all about MTV, and I admit, every morning I woke up with MTV on while I got ready for work. Loved my MTV. And actually, I learned how to become a systems programmer, and that sort of makes sense why I became a systems programmer and certified programmer, because I was into technology at the time. I was the typical Gen Xer, although I did not play Nintendo. But work was what kept me ticking at work, were those difficult challenges. I always I got bored when things were really status quo and clean. So I was one of those who always looked for those challenges in my job. Always looked for task forces to join so I could help fix whatever needed to be fixed. And I here's where I am different personally. I did not have the work-life balance where most Gen Xers do. They were more focused on the work-life balance, where I was more focused on my career. I was very, very independent. Um, uh, I actually put my job first and did not imagine that I would ever get married because I was so independent. But there's just an example of where I do fit the stereotypes of Gen X, but yet at the same time I don't. I did change my job, um, and I was actually uh, interested in more compensation and continuing to crawl up the ladder and make it up the ladder. But so there's where there's some differences in the stereotypes, but at the same time, I can fit some of them. And the millennials, they experienced natural disasters. They are uh, really all about diversity, and they know nothing else. Well, they do know much more else, but they were very uh, focused on their mobile technology. And you can even sort of see that today if you're walking down the street or just watching them on a metro if you're here or in a city that has um, a transit system. But they are all about the freedom and flexibility that we spoke about. Changing jobs, expect them to want to change jobs. That's why it's very important to keep them. If you want to keep them in your company or organization, change up their jobs and their goals, and that's the way to keep them enhanced and interested. And their careers, because of that, they switch very frequently and fast because they get bored in their jobs. So that's just a good thing to know about effectively working in that workforce, is give them more short-term goals and projects versus the more traditionalists that like the slow and steady, let me do this for my career type of mindset. And then the Gen 2020, the Gen Zers, they were experiencing the economic downturn most of their lives and also experiencing global warming. So for them, work is constantly evolving, but they would like structure and that stability. But yet at the same time, they're changing jobs constantly because their work is evolving constantly. And if you need a multitasker, they are the ones to multitask and take on many different opportunities just to keep life interesting for them. So with that, I think we can leave this up and I'll take questions. And Dr. Farrell, any insights into how you operate? Are you more structured and fit the stereotypes, or are you a little more outside the generalities of your generation?
Thank you. So I'm a boomer, and I would say that I think I've worked with all of the different generations, so I probably have a little bit of each of them, honestly, right? But I'm definitely from the boomer. Yes, I'm definitely from the boomer generation. But yes, I think, when you look at especially us as innovation experts, right? Part of our discussion tonight is really, how do we harness all of our entire workforce through the lens of really advancing innovation? And so not only are we looking at it from an effectiveness of the organizational business outcomes, we're looking at how can we most constructively partner, pair, put in teams, etc., to drive innovation through the lens of all of these different perspectives, right? So I think it would be interesting to kind of talk about maybe from your perspective, you know, you as an entrepreneur and you as an innovator have, you know, a heavy focus on the technological innovations. And then, you know, as you moved through that, how are you maybe bringing, how are some of the parties that you're working with in these different generations being additive to those innovation activities and outcomes, Kim?
That's a great question, and it is very interesting. In my answer, or what I think is my answer is that my USB storage case that I invented, it is more for the technological folks who use USB drives constantly. It's just a way to organize your USBs and know what's stored on them. So I am, in that regard, tailoring more to the younger generations who are all about technology. But at the same time, interestingly, it was the traditionalist
Yep.
that is my manufacturer who
Yep.
was very, I mean, he was talking so specific that we were discussing the shrinkage of the hot plastic
Yes.
to the size of a hair. And I mean, what precision we're talking there, which is not technological, it's more mechanic.
Mhm.
And I'm glad that he was able to talk to, you know, the size, the precision of a piece of hair to make my
Yes.
product most the most quality and best quality that could be for the users who are more the younger generation. So yeah, very, very fascinating question that has a very interesting answer across all generations, and it all
They-
worked out well.
Yes, yes. So maybe, you know, along those same lines, right, is maybe how, you know, you know, how did you approach let's just look at your career or your innovation trajectory, right? What were maybe the influences from the different generations that moved you forward through that innovation cycle?
Yeah, that's a great question as well, Dr. Farrell. Um, I think it's the reason why I have been successful in my communications, which I think is so critical um, to what I've been able to do throughout my career, is I tailor to, or I try to tailor to all generations and how they best communicate. I I myself am a paper person. Love my paper.
Yes.
Um, just love it. But yet, look at the younger generations where it's all about digital transformation and social media. Where that's why I was so shocked when my mother, of all people, learned how to text before I did when the text function actually came out. I was like, oh
Yes.
my goodness, I am behind the bar here.
Yeah.
When my mom's actually texting, who's not, you know, not into technology, scared of it, in fact, but she learned how to do it because that was the best way to communicate. And sort of that was my lessons learned is throughout my career, learn how, and in fact, sometimes, well, actually, many times, I ask whoever I'm going to be working with on a routine basis, I actually ask them, what is your favorite mode of communication? Because I want to be able to communicate with them, and the best way to communicate is whatever works best for them. So for those who love texting, I send them texts. For those who like email, I send them emails. Interestingly, but not so much, the traditionalists and boomers love the phone and face-to-face conversations. So I make sure that I call those people if I can't meet with them face-to-face. And that has really helped me communicate most effectively with the people I need to communicate with to make change and move a project forward, or execute on any mission or any project. So that has been, I think, the most important piece for me. And as another example, I actually learned last week that the college and university students, I just thought that they liked Facebook and LinkedIn. And so I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn. Never post really too much on Instagram or anything else. But then I learned last week that most of the college students are into Instagram right at the moment. So what did I do? Conveniently, just last night, I set up my Instagram account and started posting on Instagram just so I could communicate with them, because
Yes.
I made an assumption that was not the correct assumption, in that they were using Facebook and LinkedIn. So by communicating and asking, how do you communicate best? And they say Instagram. And then I confirmed that with two other college students, that they too use Instagram more than any other social media platform. I'm now posting on Instagram to be able to communicate, and it's been very, very powerful and very interesting to help move your mission forward, and just by learning how people communicate best.
Yes. So I'd like to pull that thread, in your federal government repertoire portfolio. You've worked on this BFACT innovation. Can you talk to that? Maybe, how your development and implementation maybe included some of the principles that you're sharing with us tonight, and then how did you approach the life cycle of that to be inclusive of these generations?
Yes, and that too is a very interesting story now that you mention it. So I became the chief financial officer at this federal authority, and it was an innovative authority where we're going to be creating telecommunications and um, just products that did not exist to help the first responders communicate more effectively, talking about communication. And so this was an innovative federal authority. And I, as a CFO, was using spreadsheets and had to track my budget formulation, my budget execution via spreadsheets. And our budget was so complex that we were actually breaking the macros on these on these spreadsheets. So we actually called the company and the vendor in and said, hey, can you please fix these macros, because we need to track our government funding down to the penny, and we're not really able to do that with these broken macros. We don't have good, reliable data. So I actually looked outside federal government to a commercial product that was never used within government, and I thought, this product will really solve all of our issues. We'll have auditability, we'll have good data, we'll have accurate data, we can have timely reporting. So I implemented and brought in a product that did wonders for us. I was able to take one budget execution briefing that I did monthly, and what took 80 hours for one person to compile each month took only 30 minutes. And most of that time was just doing the analysis on the information that we had, that was reliable, that was accurate, that was timely. And that didn't include the 3 different reviews we had to do after or before we implemented and did all this manual processing. So as a result, I was able to utilize the multi-generational workforce generalities of how each generation ticked and communicated best. And I was able to build that into my change management approach
Yes.
so that I could effectively communicate with any of the generations on the changes we were making, on the benefits of the changes we were going to make. And we successfully implemented this new system within 16 weeks. And what is more exciting is not only did we implement and were successful at my federal authority, but now today I am still actually speaking on the benefits of the solution. And there are now over 35 federal agencies that are utilizing it because of the communications that we were able to influence the change and understand the changes and how to implement the change based on the different generations and how they accepted change and
Yes.
appreciated the communications.
Well, I love how you really go back to this life cycle, right? It's like first understand your stakeholders and understand who that solution is going to benefit. How can you really highlight what the value is to each of them, right? And then how do you bake that into your life cycle? This is phenomenal. So I want to pull the thread on one more part of your background, and that's your certificate for executive leadership in artificial intelligence. And it's really the partnership for public service, but I think there's a lot there, right? Both from a leadership perspective and what you're talking about tonight with regard to inclusivity, interrelationships, collaboration, communication, the change model, etc. You know, what's something in this artificial intelligence bucket, if you will, that you feel it really maps well across this multi-generational approach? And, you know, what are you foreseeing the impact, hopefully positive, right, to kind of our innovation life cycles going forward?
Yes. Well, that's interesting. And I think it will continue to be very interesting in the adoption of AI across the different generations. For the younger generations in the workforce, they are already adopting artificial intelligence, utilizing it. And the more I hear about AI, the more of the older generations, the traditionalist boomers that are now starting to accept AI. And I completely understand why. If you look at the traditionalists, on the one side of the spectrum, they are slow and steady in change. They don't like a lot of change. So for them, it's important to allow them, in my opinion, to accept the change slower than what you would expect from a Gen Z or Gen Y. Gen Zers and Gen Yers are already accepting the change, probably already using it, and actually all of us are using it. It's more the traditionalists and boomers that aren't recognizing that we're using AI. They don't know it's really AI, but it is. Just your face recognition on your phone is AI. But how many of us think about AI in that manner? So I think it's just important to understand, if you are in an organization that is implementing and adopting AI, have the expectation that your younger generations will adopt it much faster, and you need to give your traditionalist and boomer generations more time to adopt it, understand it, and change with it. And one of the examples I like to use is the elevator. When the elevator was was first created, nobody really liked to use it. They were scared to use it until there was a stop button because nobody really understood how do you stop an elevator? How do you control it? And now, if you look at every day, how often do you, when you get into an elevator, think about the stop button or the risk associated with using an elevator? We
Mhm.
don't anymore, but that was the concern back when the elevator was created. And I think it's the same with AI. You're always going to have your early adopters, and in this case, I do expect it to be the millennials and Gen Zers. But just anticipate that most, not all, but most of the traditionalists and boomers will just need more time to feel comfortable. Oh, maybe it's when that stop button in AI, whatever that looks like, maybe that's when they'll begin to better or more quickly accept AI because they will better understand it and better feel more comfortable with it.
Thank you, Kim. So maybe pulling the thread, as you as an executive leader and leading teams both in the past and going forward, is that, and you kind of talked about the fact that each generation has different career expectations and aspirations. What are there some innovative approaches that you've seen organizations adopt or that you'd like to advise so that you can better and more strongly align these diverse career expectations and aspirations across your multi-generational staff, contractors, etc.?
I think it's going to be the same as it is today, and that
Mhm.
is expecting, again, generalities we're talking about. The younger generation will probably want the shorter term projects rather than the traditionalists and baby boomers who will want the project to work on for the rest of their career for a longer period of time. And
Mhm.
what'll be interesting is to see what the next generation in the workforce looks like.
Yes.
And I think it's important to take these current 5 generations that we're talking about today and just anticipating that that next generation will look a little different if it follows the trend of all these different generations that we're looking at on this screen right now, and just expect change and be open to that change and feel as though you are ready for accepting the new generation and how it reacts and practices, and just be ready for that change and embrace it because they too will bring a new mindset, a new frame of reference that we probably haven't seen through these 5 generations we're looking at on screen today.
Well, thank you so much, Miss Kim Farrington, for a wonderful kickoff to our ASQ Innovation TC 2025 session tonight. We are so grateful for you, your expertise, and we wish you well on your entrepreneurship and your Senate candidacy journey. So join me, everyone on the line, just thanking our wonderful speaker, Kim. Thank you so much.
Thank
So
you,
for
Dr. Farrell.
Thank you. For those of you who are not familiar with the innovation technical community, we have a new set of wonderful officers that love innovation and would love to engage with you. So we welcome Mr. Tracy Owens back to our officer team for 2025, our chair-elect, Miss Jackie Jolly, our secretary, Sonia Montero, our immediate past chair, Miss Rebecca Mott, and our financial manager, Mr. Larry Miller. We would love your support, your ideas, your innovations with regard to what our team fields in 2025 and beyond. So please feel free to reach out to Tracy at the email listed or fill out our survey so that we can better serve you going forward. And tonight we are also honoring the father, if you will, of our ASQ Innovation Technical Community Journey. So it is with great sadness that we reflect on his passing earlier this year, but we want to elevate and recognize and just offer his family and the greater community, not only our communities, but our respect for all that he brought to ASQ and all that he brought to each of us as innovation leaders. So your contributions will never be forgotten. And thank you, Mr. Peter Merrill, for all that you have done, so many, not only within ASQ, but all across the entire world. And last but not least, we invite you back to our future ASQ Innovation Technical Community sessions. You can find out more about us on our My ASQ Innovation TC page. You can find more about the research that ASQ Raised to the Power of Excellence Insights on Excellence reports offers from an innovation and an industry perspective. You can join us if you're not already part of our wonderful global communities. And again, we invite you back on the 27th of February to talk about really the future of business development, an innovative approach to dialogue and decision making with Mr. Peter Lierney, where we'll talk about the innovations within the field, also the approaches, but the key roles that he's advocating from his research and his fielding to really amplify your business development outcomes. And then we meet in March, April, May, and June with the lineup. You have a phenomenal set of speakers in all different industries. We hope you'll come back and visit us again in the near future for our webinars and for our conference opportunities. So again, we close this initial offering of ASQ Innovation Technical Community, and we thank our phenomenal speaker, Miss Kim Farrington. We wish you phenomenal outcomes in all that you're undergoing this year, both as an entrepreneur and with your candidacy. And we thank each and every one of you for being here tonight. So thank you. And we will close for tonight. Bless you all.